Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her tactical vest one final time as the convoy prepared to move through the narrow mountain pass. The Afghan sun blazed overhead, casting sharp shadows between the rocky cliffs that towered on both sides of the dirt road. She had been deployed for 8 months now, and every patrol still felt like walking into the unknown. Maria wasn't supposed to be here. Originally assigned to supply logistics at the main base, she had volunteered for this forward operating post when they needed experienced personnel. Her commanding officers had hesitated at first. Not because she lacked skills, but because the remote outpost had a reputation for being one of the most dangerous assignments in the region. The convoy consisted of 4 armored vehicles carrying supplies to forward operating Base Echo, a small installation nestled deep in Taliban territory. Maria rode in the second vehicle, her M4 rifle ready and her eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead. The radio crackled with routine check-ins from other units in the area. 26 years old and, originally from Texas, Maria had joined the military straight out of high school. Her father had served in Vietnam, and her brother was currently stationed in Germany. Military service ran in the Santos family like a steady current, pulling each generation into its flow. But Maria had always been different from her family members. While they chose traditional combat roles, she excelled in logistics and tactical planning. Her reputation for staying calm under pressure had earned her respect throughout the base. Other soldiers often sought her advice on everything from equipment maintenance to family problems back home. She had a natural ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. This skill would prove more valuable than anyone could have imagined. The convoy had been traveling for 2 hours when the first sign of trouble appeared. Their lead vehicle reported movement on the ridgeline ahead. Through her binoculars, Maria spotted several figures moving between the rocks. The standard protocol called for the convoy to halt and wait for air support, but their radio communications had been spotty all morning. "Contact ahead," came the tense voice of Lieutenant Rodriguez through the radio. "Multiple personnel on the ridge. Cannot establish clear identification." Maria studied the terrain carefully. The narrow pass stretched for another mile before opening into a wider valley. Behind them, the route back to base would take hours to navigate safely. To their left and right, steep rocky slopes offered little room for maneuvering the heavy vehicles. The convoy commander made the decision to proceed with caution. As they moved forward, the figures on the ridgeline seemed to multiply. What started as 3 or 4 shapes became a dozen, then more. The hair on the back of Maria's neck stood up as she realized they were being watched from multiple positions. Private Johnson, sitting across from her in the vehicle, nervously checked his weapon for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. He was 19 years old and this was his first deployment. Maria had taken him under her wing during the past month, teaching him the subtle signs that could mean the difference between life and death in this environment. "Stay focused on your sector," Maria advised quietly. "Don't try to watch everything at once. Trust your training and trust your team." The radio suddenly burst to life with urgent chatter from the lead vehicle. "We have movement on both sides now. Multiple contacts. Request immediate air support." Maria felt her heart rate increase, but her mind remained clear. She had been in similar situations before, though never quite this isolated. The convoy was now completely surrounded in the narrow pass, with potential threats on the high ground on both sides. In military terms, this was called a kill zone, a tactical nightmare that every soldier hoped to avoid. The convoy commander ordered all vehicles to stop while they assessed the situation. Through her window, Maria could see the rocky slopes more clearly now. The movement was definitely human, and definitely coordinated. Someone was using hand signals to position people along the ridgeline. "This doesn't look like a random encounter," she said to her vehicle commander, Sergeant First Class Williams. "They knew we were coming this way." Williams nodded grimly. "Intelligence said this route was clear, but intelligence has been wrong before." The minutes stretched by with agonizing slowness. Each second felt like an hour as they waited for some sign of what would happen next. Maria used the time to study every detail of their surroundings, looking for anything that might give them an advantage if the situation escalated. The convoy consisted of 12 soldiers total, split between 4 vehicles. They had enough firepower to defend themselves, but their position was far from ideal. The vehicles offered some protection, but they were essentially trapped in a corridor with limited options for movement. Maria's mind raced through possible scenarios. If they tried to retreat, the narrow road would force them to back up slowly while exposed to fire from above. If they pushed forward, they would have to pass directly under the positions where movement had been spotted. Neither option seemed particularly appealing. The radio crackled again with an update from base. Air support is 30 minutes out. Weather is causing delays. 30 minutes. In a firefight, 30 minutes might as well be 30 hours. If the people on the ridges had hostile intentions, they wouldn't wait for American helicopters to arrive before making their move. Maria noticed something that others had missed. The positions on the left side of the pass were slightly different from those on the right. The people on the left seemed to be moving with military precision, staying low and using cover effectively. But the group on the right moved differently, more like civilians who were curious rather than threatening. "Sergeant Williams," she said quietly, "I think we might be dealing with 2 different groups here." Williams looked at her questioningly. "What do you mean?" "The movement patterns are different on each side. Left side looks military. Right side looks like locals, maybe shepherds or farmers who heard the vehicles and came to look." This observation could change everything. If one group was hostile and the other was just curious civilians, the tactical situation became much more complex. Treating all the movement as equally threatening could lead to a tragic mistake. The convoy commander's voice came over the radio again. "All units maintain defensive positions. Do not engage unless fired upon." Maria continued to study the terrain, looking for details that others might miss. Her training in logistics had taught her to notice patterns and connections that weren't immediately obvious. Now, that same analytical mindset was being applied to a potentially life-threatening situation. She noticed that the military-style movement on the left ridge had stopped. The figures there were now in fixed positions, suggesting they might be setting up for something. On the right ridge, the civilian-looking group continued to move around, some of them pointing toward the convoy vehicles. Private Johnson shifted nervously beside her. "What do you think they're waiting for, Sergeant?" "Could be anything," Maria replied honestly. "Maybe they're waiting for us to make the first move. Maybe they're waiting for something else entirely." The temperature inside the vehicle was rising as the sun climbed higher overhead. Maria could feel sweat trickling down her back beneath her body armor. The tension was becoming almost unbearable, but she forced herself to remain calm and observant. Then, she saw something that changed everything. On the left ridge, where the military-style movement had been observed, she caught a brief reflection of sunlight off metal. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to confirm her worst fears. Someone up there had a weapon, and they were in position to use it. Maria keyed her radio. "This is Santos in Vehicle 2. I have possible weapons reflection from the left ridge, approximately 200 meters ahead of our position." The convoy commander acknowledged her report. Now they knew for certain that at least some of the people watching them were armed and potentially hostile. The question remained, what were they waiting for? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. A single shot rang out from somewhere on the left ridge, the sound echoing off the rocky walls of the pass. It wasn't aimed at the convoy, but rather seemed to be a signal of some kind. Immediately, the radio erupted with chatter from all vehicles. "Contact! Contact! We have incoming fire!" But Maria realized that the single shot hadn't been aimed at them. It was a warning, or perhaps a signal to begin something. She watched the ridges carefully and saw both groups of people beginning to move again, but in different directions. The civilian group on the right ridge was moving away from the area, disappearing back into the rocks as quickly as they had appeared. They wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. The military group on the left, however, was advancing to better positions. "They're trying to get closer," Maria reported. "Left ridge only. Right ridge is clearing out." This information was crucial for the convoy commander's decision-making. Instead of facing threats from both sides, they were now dealing with a single group approaching from the left. It was still dangerous, but it opened up tactical options that hadn't existed before. The convoy commander made a quick decision. All vehicles prepare to move forward. We're not staying in this kill zone any longer than necessary. As the engines roared to life and the convoy began to move, Maria felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They were taking action instead of sitting still, which felt better psychologically. But they were also about to pass directly under the positions where armed personnel had been spotted. The lead vehicle began moving slowly down the narrow road, its gunner scanning the left ridge constantly. Maria's vehicle followed, with her own eyes fixed on the rocky slopes above them. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every boulder could conceal a gunman. As they rolled forward, Maria noticed something else. The armed group on the left wasn't firing at them, even though the convoy was now well within range. They seemed to be pacing the vehicles, moving parallel to the road but not engaging. This suggested they might be waiting for something specific, perhaps a particular location where they had prepared an ambush. "They're not shooting," Private Johnson observed nervously. "Not yet," Maria replied. "But they're following us. Stay alert." The convoy continued its slow progress through the pass. Each meter felt like a small victory, bringing them closer to the relative safety of the open valley beyond. But Maria couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was still ahead of them. Her instincts proved correct. As the lead vehicle approached a particularly narrow section of the road, where rocky outcroppings closed in on both sides, the radio suddenly exploded with urgent shouts. "RPG! RPG! Incoming from the left!" Maria saw the telltale smoke trail of a rocket-propelled grenade streaking down from the ridge toward the lead vehicle. Time seemed to slow as she watched the deadly projectile arc through the air. This was the moment everything changed. The convoy was now officially under attack, and there was no going back. The RPG struck the rocky wall just behind the lead vehicle, showering the area with stone fragments and smoke. The explosion was deafening in the confined space of the pass. Maria felt her vehicle rock slightly from the concussion, but they kept moving. "All units return fire." "Return fire," came the order over the radio. The narrow pass erupted in gunfire as the convoy's gunners opened up on the ridge positions. The sound was overwhelming, with multiple weapons firing simultaneously and the echoes bouncing off the canyon walls. Maria could see muzzle flashes from several positions on the left ridge as the ambushers revealed their locations. But even as the firefight intensified, Maria was thinking beyond the immediate threat. Her training and experience told her that this ambush had been carefully planned. The attackers had chosen their position well, using the terrain to their advantage. But every plan had weaknesses, and her job was to find them. As her vehicle continued to move through the chaos of the firefight, Maria studied the pattern of incoming fire. The shots weren't random. They were coming from specific locations in a coordinated manner. This told her that the enemy had good leadership and discipline, which made them more dangerous but also more predictable. "Driver, stop the vehicle," she suddenly ordered. "What?" Sergeant Williams looked at her in surprise. "We need to keep moving." "Stop the vehicle," Maria repeated firmly. "I need to see something." Against his better judgment, Williams ordered the driver to halt. Through the gun ports, Maria carefully observed the enemy positions. What she saw confirmed her suspicions and gave her an idea that could change everything. The enemy had positioned themselves well for a linear ambush along the road, but they had left themselves vulnerable from an unexpected direction. The foundations for her plan were falling into place, but implementing it would require convincing her superiors and taking enormous personal risks. As bullets continued to crack overhead and explosions echoed through the pass, Maria began to formulate the boldest tactical decision of her military career. Maria keyed her radio with steady hands despite the chaos erupting around them. "Convoy Commander, this is Santos. I need to speak with you immediately." "Not now, Santos. "We're in the middle of a firefight," came the sharp reply from Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Sir, I have a tactical assessment that could get us out of this," Maria insisted, her voice cutting through the noise of gunfire and explosions. There was a brief pause before Rodriguez responded. "Go ahead, but make it quick." Maria took a deep breath. What she was about to propose went against standard military doctrine, but sometimes unconventional situations required unconventional solutions. "Sir, the enemy position has a critical weakness. They're focused entirely on the road and the left approach. The right side of the pass is completely unguarded now that the civilians cleared out." "What are you suggesting, Sergeant?" "I'm suggesting a flanking maneuver. Small team moves up the right ridge while the convoy provides covering fire. We can get above and behind their positions." The radio was silent for several seconds as Rodriguez considered this. Around them, the firefight continued with neither side gaining a clear advantage. The convoy's superior firepower was offset by the enemy's advantageous position on the high ground. "Santos, that's suicide. You'd be completely exposed during the climb." "Not if we time it right, sir." "Look at their firing pattern. They're focused on the vehicles. They're not watching the right flank at all." Maria could hear Rodriguez discussing the plan with other senior personnel in the convoy. Meanwhile, the enemy fire seemed to be intensifying. Several more RPG rounds had been fired, though none had found their mark yet. But it was only a matter of time before the convoy's luck ran out. "Santos," Rodriguez's voice returned to the radio. "Explain your plan in detail. The right ridge has good cover for the first 100 meters. Natural rock formations provide concealment from the enemy positions. A small team could make it to the high ground without being detected. From there, we'd have clear fields of fire into their positions." "How many personnel would you need?" 3, maybe 4. "Small team moves faster and attracts less attention." "And who exactly would lead this team?" Maria had been expecting this question. She knew the answer would determine whether her plan would be approved or rejected immediately. "I would, sir." The radio exploded with voices as multiple people tried to speak at once. Maria could hear heated arguments in the background. She wasn't supposed to be leading combat operations. Her role was logistics support, not tactical assault. Sergeant Williams, sitting next to her in the vehicle, grabbed her arm. "Maria, you can't be serious. That climb would be impossible under fire." "Not under fire," she replied. "That's the point. They can't see the right approach from their current positions." Private Johnson looked at her with wide eyes. "Can I volunteer to go with you, Sergeant?" "No," Maria said firmly. "You stay here and help suppress the enemy positions. That's going to be just as important as the flanking move." The convoy commander's voice finally cut through the radio chatter. "Santos, this is Colonel Mitchell. I've been monitoring your conversation. Your plan has merit, but I can't authorize a sergeant to lead a flanking assault. With respect, sir, rank doesn't matter right now. What matters is getting this convoy out of the kill zone." "I understand that, but..." Colonel Mitchell's words were cut off by the sound of another RPG explosion, this one much closer to the convoy. Maria could see smoke rising from somewhere near the lead vehicle. Time was running out for all of them. "Sir," Maria said into the radio, "every minute we delay gives the enemy more time to bring up reinforcements. This opportunity won't last long." There was another pause, during which Maria could hear intense discussion among the senior officers. She understood their dilemma. Approving her plan meant accepting significant risk. Rejecting it meant staying pinned down in an increasingly dangerous situation. "Santos," Colonel Mitchell finally responded, "if I authorize this operation, what personnel would you select for your team?" Maria had already thought about this. "Corporal Hayes from Vehicle 3. He's got mountain warfare training. Private Martinez from Vehicle 4, best marksman in the unit. And Specialist Thompson, demolitions expert." "That's a solid team selection," Sergeant Williams admitted quietly. "But I still think this is crazy." The radio crackled again. "Santos, you have authorization for flanking maneuver. Call sign will be Raven. You have 15 minutes to get into position before we adjust our fire support pattern." Maria felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with apprehension. Her plan had been approved, but now she had to execute it under combat conditions. There was no room for error. "Roger, sir. Raven team moving out in 2 minutes." She quickly coordinated with the other vehicles to gather her team members. Corporal Hayes was already moving before she finished explaining the plan. Private Martinez double-checked his rifle and ammunition. Specialist Thompson grabbed extra demolitions equipment that might be useful for clearing enemy positions. "Listen carefully," Maria briefed them during the brief lull in enemy fire. "We move fast and quiet up the right ridge. Stay low, use cover, maintain noise discipline. Our goal is to get behind their positions without being detected." "What's the signal for attack?" Hayes asked. "Radio call Raven strike. When you hear that, engage all enemy positions with maximum firepower. We want to hit them fast and overwhelm them before they can reposition." The team prepared to leave the relative safety of their armored vehicles. Maria checked her equipment one final time: rifle, ammunition, radio, first aid kit, and water. Everything she might need for the next hour of what could be the most dangerous mission of her life. "Remember," she told her team, "the convoy is counting on us. But we're also counting on them to keep the enemy focused forward. This only works if everyone does their part." Thompson nodded. "We've got your back, Sergeant." Maria felt a moment of doubt. These were good soldiers, but they were following her into extreme danger based on her tactical assessment. If she was wrong about the enemy positions or the approach route, all of them could be killed or wounded. "Santos," Williams called out as she prepared to leave the vehicle. "Be smart out there. Don't take unnecessary risks." "The whole thing is an unnecessary risk," she replied with a grim smile. "But it's the best option we have." The team moved out of the vehicles during a brief lull in the firefight. Maria led the way, using hand signals to communicate with her team members. The rocky terrain on the right side of the pass was rough and unstable, but it provided excellent cover from observation. For the first 50 meters, the climb went exactly as Maria had planned. They moved from rock to rock, staying low and maintaining silence. The enemy positions were clearly visible on the opposite ridge, but the fighters there remained focused on the convoy vehicles below. Hayes tapped Maria on the shoulder and pointed upward. About 100 meters ahead, the ridgeline curved around toward the enemy positions. That would be their attack point, where they could set up overlapping fields of fire into the ambush sites. The team continued climbing, their progress slower now as the terrain became more challenging. Maria could hear the ongoing firefight below them, but it seemed strangely distant from their current position. Up here on the ridge, they were in their own tactical environment. Martinez suddenly held up his hand in a stop signal. He had spotted something that made him freeze in place. Maria crawled forward to see what had caught his attention. On the ridge ahead of them, about 200 meters away, she could see movement. It wasn't part of the main enemy group that was engaging the convoy. This appeared to be a separate element, possibly a security team watching for exactly the kind of flanking maneuver they were attempting. Maria's heart rate increased as she realized their approach had been partially anticipated. The enemy wasn't quite as focused on the road as she had thought. They had placed at least some personnel in positions to watch for threats from other directions. Using hand signals, she communicated the situation to her team. They would have to deal with this security element before they could attack the main ambush positions. This added complexity and risk to an already dangerous mission. Thompson crawled up beside her and whispered, "How many?" "At least 3, maybe more. Hard to tell from this angle." "We could go around," Hayes suggested quietly. "No," Maria decided. "Going around would take too much time and expose us to observation from multiple directions. We deal with this obstacle and continue with the original plan." She studied the enemy security position carefully. The fighters there had chosen their location well, with good observation of the approach routes and solid cover from rocks and boulders. But they had made one mistake: they were positioned to watch for threats coming up from the road, not from further along the ridge. "Here's what we're going to do," Maria whispered to her team. "Martinez, you set up here with your rifle. When I give the signal, take out the furthest target first. Hayes and Thompson, we're going to circle around from above and hit them from the backside." It was a sound tactical plan, but it required precise timing and coordination. Any mistake could alert the entire enemy force to their presence and position. Maria checked her watch. They had been climbing for 8 minutes, which left them 7 minutes to eliminate this threat and get into position for the main attack. The timeline was becoming critically tight. She led Hayes and Thompson in a wide circle around the enemy security position, moving carefully over the rocky terrain. Each step had to be planned and executed silently. One loose rock or metallic sound could give them away. As they maneuvered into position, Maria could see the security team more clearly. 3 fighters with automatic weapons, positioned to cover the approaches from below. They were alert and well-armed, but they weren't expecting an attack from above and behind. Maria positioned her team members and checked the time again. 2 minutes until the main assault was scheduled to begin. They needed to move fast. She raised her hand to signal the attack. Martinez would fire first, taking out the furthest target. Then, Hayes and Thompson would engage the remaining fighters from their flanking position. Maria would provide supporting fire and coordinate the assault. The plan worked perfectly. Martinez's first shot dropped the distant fighter before he could react. Hayes and Thompson opened fire immediately afterward, catching the remaining 2 fighters completely by surprise. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. But the gunfire from their small battle had alerted the main enemy force. Maria could hear shouting from the ambush positions and see fighters beginning to move in their direction. The element of surprise for the main attack had been partially compromised. Raven to convoy commander, Maria called on her radio. "Security element eliminated, but we've been detected. Beginning main assault now." "Roger, Raven. Convoy adjusting fire to support your attack." Maria led her team toward the main enemy positions, moving fast now that stealth was no longer possible. They had maybe 2 minutes before the enemy could reposition to deal with their threat. As they reached the attack position, Maria could see the entire enemy ambush layout spread out below them. 12 to 15 fighters in prepared positions along the ridgeline. Heavy weapons including RPGs and machine guns. It was a formidable force, but they were now vulnerable to attack from above. "All Raven elements, commence firing," Maria ordered. The ridgetop erupted in gunfire as her small team opened up on the enemy positions. Their advantage of height and surprise allowed them to immediately suppress several of the ambush sites. The enemy fighters began scrambling for new positions that would protect them from this unexpected threat. Below in the pass, the convoy immediately increased their rate of fire, taking advantage of the confusion in the enemy ranks. For the first time since the ambush began, the initiative had shifted to the American forces. But Maria knew their advantage would be temporary. The enemy would adapt quickly and begin coordinating their response. She needed to maximize the impact of these crucial first few minutes. "Thompson, put some explosives on that machine gun position," she ordered, pointing to a fortified fighting position that was still putting out effective fire. "Hayes, keep them pinned down on the left flank. Don't let them reposition. Martinez, work with the convoy fires. Target anyone who tries to move between positions." The coordinated assault was working better than Maria had dared to hope. The enemy force was being systematically suppressed and eliminated from 2 directions. But she could also see that some of the fighters were beginning to withdraw from their positions, possibly to regroup for a counterattack. The radio crackled with reports from the convoy. "Raven, this is convoy commander. Enemy fire has decreased by 70%. Whatever you're doing up there, keep it up." But Maria could see something that the convoy commander couldn't. A group of enemy fighters was moving along the ridgeline toward their position. Her small team was about to face a counterattack from determined opponents who knew the terrain well. "Get ready," she warned her team members. "Company's coming." Maria watched the enemy counterattack force moving toward their position along the ridgeline. 8 fighters armed with automatic weapons and grenades, advancing with tactical discipline despite the chaos of the ongoing battle. Her small team of 4 was about to be outnumbered 2-1 by opponents who knew this terrain intimately. "Raven team, enemy force approaching from the east along the ridge," she radioed to her team members. "Approximately 8 personnel, 200 meters and closing." Hayes looked at their position critically. "We've got decent cover here, but if they get above us on that rock formation, we'll be in trouble." Maria studied the approaching threat and the terrain between their current position and the enemy force. A bold idea began forming in her mind. It was risky, but it could neutralize the counterattack while maintaining pressure on the remaining ambush positions. "Change of plans," she announced. "We're not going to wait for them to attack us. We're going to attack them first." Thompson looked at her in surprise. "Attack? There are 8 of them." "8 of them who think they're hunting a small team in a defensive position," Maria replied. "They're not expecting us to advance toward them." She quickly outlined her plan. The enemy counterattack force would have to pass through a narrow section of the ridge where large boulders created a natural choke point. If her team could reach that location first, they could set up an ambush of their own. "Martinez, you stay here and continue supporting the convoy's fight against the main ambush positions. Hayes, Thompson, and I are going to intercept that counterattack before it reaches us." "That's going to be close timing," Hayes observed, checking his ammunition. "Everything today has been close timing," Maria replied. "But it's worked so far." She led Hayes and Thompson in a rapid movement across the rocky terrain toward the choke point. Their route took them temporarily out of sight of both the approaching enemy force and the main battle below, but it would position them perfectly for what she had in mind. As they moved, Maria could hear the continuing firefight in the pass. The convoy's gunners were maintaining steady pressure on the remaining ambush positions, while Martinez's sniper fire from the ridge was picking off any enemy fighters who tried to reposition. The ambush was clearly failing from the enemy's perspective, but they hadn't given up yet. The 3-person team reached the choke point with barely a minute to spare. Maria positioned Hayes and Thompson on opposite sides of the narrow passage between the boulders, while she took a position where she could observe the approaching enemy force. "Remember," she whispered, "let them get completely into the kill zone before we open fire. We need to get as many as possible before they can take cover." The enemy counterattack force appeared around a bend in the ridgeline, moving tactically but confidently toward where they expected to find Maria's team. They had no idea they were walking into a carefully prepared ambush. Maria counted 8 fighters, just as she had estimated. They were well armed and appeared to be experienced combatants, but their focus was on the terrain ahead rather than potential threats from the sides. It was exactly the mistake she had been hoping they would make. She waited until the entire enemy force was committed to the passage between the boulders before giving the signal to fire. Hayes and Thompson opened up simultaneously from their concealed positions, catching the enemy fighters in a devastating crossfire. The narrow confines of the choke point worked against the enemy, preventing them from spreading out or finding adequate cover. Within seconds, half of their force was down, and the remainder was scrambling desperately for any protection they could find. "Keep the pressure on," Maria ordered, adding her own fire to the assault. "Don't let them regroup." The surviving enemy fighters tried to withdraw, but the rocky terrain made rapid movement difficult. Maria's team was able to maintain contact and continue engaging them as they attempted to escape back along the ridgeline. Within 3 minutes, the counterattack had been completely neutralized. The enemy force that was supposed to eliminate Maria's team had been destroyed without inflicting any casualties on her personnel. "Raven to convoy commander," she radioed. "Counterattack eliminated. Returning to support main assault. Outstanding work, Raven. The main ambush positions are nearly neutralized. We should be able to move the convoy through in 5 minutes." But, as Maria led her team back toward their original position, she noticed something troubling. Martinez wasn't responding to her radio calls, and she could see smoke rising from the area where she had left him. "Martinez, report," she called again, but received only static in response. When they reached the sniper position, they found Martinez wounded but conscious. An enemy grenade had exploded nearby, sending rock fragments into his left arm and shoulder. He had continued fighting despite his injuries, but he needed immediate medical attention. "I'm okay, Sergeant," Martinez insisted, though blood was seeping through his uniform. "Just some cuts and bruises." "You're not okay," Maria replied firmly, examining his wounds. "Hayes, get the medical kit. Thompson, take over Martinez's position and continue supporting the convoy." As she treated Martinez's injuries, Maria could see that the main battle was winding down. The enemy ambush had been broken by the combination of the convoy's firepower and her team's flanking attack. The few surviving enemy fighters were withdrawing from their positions and disappearing into the rocky terrain. "Convoy to Raven," came the radio call. "Pass is secure. Preparing to move through. Do you need medical evacuation for your wounded?" Maria looked at Martinez, who was insisting he could walk despite his injuries. "Negative on the evacuation. We'll meet you at the rally point beyond the pass." The team began their descent from the ridge, moving carefully with Martinez. The adrenaline of combat was beginning to wear off, replaced by the exhaustion that always followed intense action. But they had accomplished something remarkable. As they reached the road, the convoy vehicles were already moving through the pass. Colonel Mitchell's vehicle stopped briefly to pick up Maria's team. As they climbed aboard, the colonel looked at Maria with an expression of respect and amazement. "Sergeant Santos," he said, "I've been in the Army for 22 years, and I've never seen a more audacious or effective tactical maneuver by a non-commissioned officer." "Just doing my job, sir," Maria replied, though she felt a surge of pride at the recognition. "No," Colonel Mitchell said firmly. "What you did today was far beyond anyone's job description. You took initiative, demonstrated tactical brilliance, and saved lives through your actions." As the convoy moved through the pass and into the open valley beyond, Maria reflected on what had just happened. In the space of an hour, she had gone from being a logistics specialist to leading a combat operation that turned the tide of a major firefight. The other members of her team were quiet, each processing their own experience of the battle. Hayes stared out at the passing landscape, still alert for potential threats. Thompson checked and rechecked his equipment, a nervous habit he had developed during his deployment. Martinez dozed fitfully, exhausted from blood loss and the stress of combat. When they reached the rally point, a secure area 5 kilometers beyond the pass, the convoy stopped to treat the wounded and assess their situation. Martinez was evacuated by helicopter to the main base hospital, where he would make a full recovery within 6 weeks. Colonel Mitchell called Maria aside for a private conversation. "Sergeant, I'm putting you in for a Bronze Star with Valor device. What you did today was exceptional by any standard." Maria was speechless. The Bronze Star was one of the highest decorations a soldier could receive, typically reserved for extraordinary heroism in combat. She had never imagined that her quick thinking and tactical planning would be recognized at such a level. Furthermore, the colonel continued, "I'm recommending you for officer candidate school. The Army needs leaders who can think and act under pressure the way you did today." Over the following weeks, as the story of the ambush spread throughout the military community, Maria found herself dealing with unexpected attention. Other units requested her expertise for tactical planning. Military journalists wanted to interview her about her experience. Senior officers sought her opinions on training and doctrine. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from her fellow soldiers. The members of the convoy, particularly those who had been under fire with her, treated her with a respect that couldn't be manufactured or assigned. They had seen her perform under the ultimate test, and they knew she had earned her place among them. Private Johnson, who had been so nervous during the initial stages of the ambush, approached her several weeks later. "Sergeant Santos, I wanted to thank you. Watching you stay calm and think clearly under fire taught me more about being a soldier than months of training." Maria smiled at the young private. "Johnson, you did your job perfectly that day. You stayed focused, followed orders, and supported your team. That's what being a soldier is really about. The investigation that followed the incident revealed that the ambush had been planned for weeks. Intelligence intercepts showed that the enemy had been tracking convoy movements and had positioned forces specifically to attack American supply runs through that pass. Without Maria's tactical intervention, the convoy would likely have suffered significant casualties. The military leadership used the incident as a case study in adaptive leadership and tactical innovation. Maria found herself speaking at training conferences and contributing to new doctrine on small unit tactics in complex terrain. But she remained committed to her original military specialty. When offered a transfer to infantry or special operations, she declined, choosing instead to continue her work in logistics while taking on additional responsibilities for tactical planning and training. Supply lines win wars, she told Colonel Mitchell when he asked about her decision. I can do more good making sure our forces have what they need than I can carrying a rifle. The colonel nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking that made your plan work in the first place. You see the bigger picture, not just the immediate problem. 6 months after the ambush, Maria was promoted to staff sergeant and assigned to develop new training programs for convoy security. Her curriculum emphasized adaptability, situational awareness, and the importance of every soldier being prepared to take leadership initiative when circumstances demanded it. The day she received her Bronze Star with Valor device, Maria's entire family attended the ceremony. Her father, the Vietnam veteran, stood with tears in his eyes as the medal was pinned to her dress uniform. Her brother, on leave from his assignment in Germany, applauded proudly from the audience. I always knew you were special, her father told her after the ceremony. But I never imagined you would do something like this. I just did what needed to be done, Maria replied. Any of the other soldiers in that convoy would have done the same thing if they had thought of it. Her brother shook his head. No, Maria. Most people would have followed standard procedures and waited for help. You saw a solution that nobody else saw, and you had the courage to act on it. As Maria looked back on that day in the Afghan pass, she realized that everything in her military career had been preparation for that moment. Her training in logistics had taught her to analyze complex situations and find solutions. Her experience in leadership had given her the confidence to make difficult decisions under pressure. Her commitment to her fellow soldiers had motivated her to take extraordinary risks on their behalf. The incident had also changed her understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. Military service wasn't just about following orders or performing assigned duties. It was about being ready to step up when the situation demanded it, regardless of rank or job description. Years later, when Maria had been promoted to sergeant major and was nearing retirement, young soldiers would ask her about that day in Afghanistan. She would tell them that courage wasn't about being unafraid, but about doing what needed to be done despite being afraid. Leadership isn't about rank or authority, she would explain. It's about seeing what needs to be done and having the will to do it, even when success isn't guaranteed. The pass where the ambush occurred was eventually secured by coalition forces and became a routine supply route. A small plaque was installed at the spot where Maria's team had climbed the ridge, commemorating the actions of Raven Team and their successful defense of Convoy Charlie 7. But, for Maria, the real monument to that day wasn't made of metal or stone. It was the knowledge that when her fellow soldiers had needed someone to lead them out of danger, she had found the strength and wisdom to do exactly that. In those crucial moments when everything hung in the balance, she had proven to herself and to everyone around her that sometimes the most unlikely person in the most impossible situation can find a way to succeed. The memory of that day would stay with her for the rest of her life, not because of the recognition or awards it brought, but because it represented the moment when she truly understood what she was capable of accomplishing when everything was on the line.